charge of product, marketing, and sales, which means you can actually expect a different, somewhat new experience compared to what you're used to with the Xiaomi phones. Now, this arrangement is great, it's interesting, it's cool, because we have the backing of one of the greatest smartphone brands in the world today. Xiaomi is the #1 India smartphone brand and the #4 in the world. In fact, Xiaomi has 6 factories in India producing millions and millions of smartphones every single month. And not just that, according to a recent third-party survey, Xiaomi is the leader in after-sales service with over 1,000 service centers in India, just in case you have some concerns, which we don't expect to have. And as we all know, quality is the lifeline of our business. We take quality very, very seriously. And I'm pleased to tell you that POCO takes the exact same strict and high quality standards that you would expect from a Xiaomi phone. Already, I'm pleased to tell you that Manu is also in the audience with us today. So may I invite Manu to say hi to the audience here. Thank you, Manu. Now let's take a look at the POCO team. You can see there are 8 of us, and we look pretty happy, right? Pretty well rested, pretty happy, pretty relaxed. We come from very different backgrounds. It is a very diverse team. Some of us grew up in Singapore, in China, in India, and in America. But despite such cultural differences, we actually share one thing in common, and that is our passion for smartphones. All of us had many years of working experience in the mobile industry, and we believe this time we can contribute something different and inject some new energy to the industry. Many months ago, the 8 of us sat together and thought a little bit more about how the smartphone industry is being developed. Where is it heading? What are the trends? We realized that if we really drill down to the basics of smartphones, there are 5 or 6 areas that constitute the essentials of a flagship smartphone. They are the camera setup, battery, ID, display, and of course, the brain of the smartphone, its processor. But as competition becomes more fierce, as innovation becomes incremental, many new brands, many big brands, they're trying to come up with new features years after years that some may argue may or may not be relevant to users. But they certainly add to the cost, which leads to this problem. The team has seen that there are more and more flagships being priced even more expensively year after year, some of which actually blew past the $1,000 price point, pricing out many consumers, many tech enthusiasts from the opportunity of trying the latest technologies. POCO wanted to build something that bucked this trend. If you think about it, why are the smartphones becoming more expensive? It's because a lot of these brands, they are trying to build the jack of all trades. They're trying to build the all-rounders that excels in every single aspect. But as we all know, in life, if you try to be good at everything, you end up not being best at anything. Which is why POCO's mission is to focus on innovations that truly matter. We are determined to build products that allow many, many consumers to be able to try out the latest technologies that truly make a difference in your lives. This is a very difficult task. It is no easy feat. But we feel like this is necessary. After many months of hard work, I'm pleased to tell you that POCO is proud to say that we are the champion of performance. Performance matters. Speed matters. The ability to enjoy your smartphone on a day-to-day basis without any lags matters. Do you agree? So our first product embodies this philosophy, this belief, this need that performance should be a basic right to smartphone users. We are proud to call this cool product the POCO F1. And of course, we need to give it the most powerful slogan ever. And we are calling it the true master of speed. I really think you will all love it. So, without more suspense, without further ado, let me welcome the most popular, the most handsome, Jay, the new head of product for POCO Global, on stage.
Thanks, man. Hello, everyone. How are you? It's nice to finally be back here in India. My name is Jay Mani, and I'm the head of product for POCO Global. And today, I'm really honored to be presenting our first product, the POCO F1. This has literally been one of my dream phones. That is something that I've wanted to make for years now. And with POCO, we were able to start from scratch and make product decisions that result in a very different phone from what you see on the market today. So even if you think you already know everything about the phone, stick with us. We want to spend some time to explain to you why we did these things and why we think it results in a truly awesome experience. So let's get started? All right. So today I'm going to talk about three things: performance, camera, and experience. And we believe that these three things have the biggest impact on how you ultimately feel about your phone. And because we're the master of speed, let's start with the most important thing, the performance. So for the POCO F1, we wanted to focus on the things that really matter for performance. And everybody knows that the most critical factor when it comes to performance is the chipset. And so the first decision we made was to use Qualcomm's top-of-the-line Snapdragon 845. And there are actually very few phones sold in India today that are using this chipset. But since we're focused on speed, this is the obvious choice. Snapdragon 845 uses a second-generation 10-nanometer FinFET process. This process offers clock speeds of up to 2.8 gigahertz while maintaining good battery life and good thermal performance. And the Adreno 630 GPU has a 30% improved performance versus the previous generation from Snapdragon 835. And this is an important point, which I'll touch on in a later slide. But this is a 30% improvement on Qualcomm's already super fast GPU. It absolutely flies for gaming, no matter how heavy. So Qualcomm also made great efforts to improve the AI performance. Snapdragon 845 has 3 times the performance on AI tasks when it is compared to 835. This helps a lot on things particularly around the camera, which is something that we'll touch on later in the presentation. So let's look at how Snapdragon 845 stacks up to some of the other Android flagship SoCs. Here's the Kirin 970, the Exynos 9810. And you can see that the Snapdragon 845 performance is better. Here we're showing the Antutu scores. It's about a 10% improvement versus Samsung's chip, and this is what they use in all their flagship devices here in India. And over a 35% improvement when compared to the Kirin 970. But I mentioned the GPU earlier, so let's hone in on that specifically. We took a look at the GFX bench. This is Manhattan off-screen, and this is where the 845 really shines. It's 30% better in GPU than the Exynos 9810, and more than 60% better than the Kirin 970. The Adreno 630 absolutely destroys the competition here. And as many of you know, GPU is something that's becoming more important today as people start playing the latest crop of mobile games, which are more graphics intensive. So if you're playing any of those games, you want the latest GPU, not something that's 1 or even 2 generations old when it comes to GPU performance. So let's talk a little bit about peak scores. I think we talked about this number in a little bit, a little while ago. This was our Antutu benchmark. We reached nearly 300,000 in the peak score, and this makes it one of the fastest Android smartphones around. But peak scores aren't the only thing that matter. Benchmarks don't tell the whole story. Because when running at peak speeds for a long period of time, the typical smartphone gets slower. You know, when you're doing things like gaming or running intensive apps, they tax the processor, which generates heat, and ultimately slows your phone down. As your phone heats up, the performance decreases. Hotter is slower. So we wanted to solve this. And we added something we're calling liquid cool. It's pretty sweet. What do you think? This is a water cooling technology, and basically it's a copper heatsink with some water vapor inside, and it's placed on top of the chipset, which cools down your phone much more quickly, allowing it to run at higher speeds for much longer. So let's check this out inside the phone. So here's a quick illustration. The SoC is up there on the top left, and this is in a situation playing a game, starts generating some heat. So in the POCO F1, we have this copper heatsink that sits on top of it. This is the blue line here. We can actually run that again. So this is the copper heatsink, the blue line. Run that again. So as you can see, what happens here is the heat generated by the SoC is distributed more evenly throughout the phone and cools down the CPU, so it can run at peak performance for a longer period of time. And when we compared this thermal performance to in our labs, liquid cool dissipates heat 300% faster than devices without it. And this is really useful in practice. And so because of liquid cool, paired with the top-of-the-line Snapdragon 845, the POCO F1 is able to sustain peak performance for a longer period of time. And the big, flashy benchmark scores are nice, but we believe that its sustained performance is what really matters. So let's see how this translates in results. This is a test we ran versus the OnePlus 6. It's the same SoC without any water cooling technology. If you'll notice up at the top, the ambient temperature is hot for some places, but rather normal here, particularly in Delhi. It's an ambient temperature of 35 degrees. And so what we did was we ran Antutu 6 times, and this was to simulate peak performance or intensive performance over a longer period of time. And this is a result from the first test. You know, it's about the same. So let's see what happens when we start running this over time. So for the first few runs, again, performance is about the same. But as we start doing this over time, thermal control kicks in. And this is because without any water cooling, the phone starts to heat up, clock speed goes down, and ultimately, your performance degrades. So being able to run at this high level the entire time is what Snapdragon 845 paired with liquid cool really allows us to do. And this is what we mean when we say speed. We're not just talking about that big benchmark score, although it is pretty cool. We mean actual real-world speed. When you play a game for half an hour, it should be the same speed the whole time. And so we believe that POCO F1 has set a new standard for performance. All right, Pretty cool so far? That was not a pun, not intended, but okay. So let's talk about my favorite thing, which is battery life. And for years, this has been a key feature that everybody tells us they love. It's one of the reasons why Redmi phones have been so successful. But typical flagship phones compromise on battery life. Generally speaking, in a flagship phone, you usually get around 3,000 mAh. And for some reason, if you want great battery life, you generally have to buy a mid-range phone. But since we were building the POCO F1 from the ground up, without any of this baggage, this trend really didn't make any sense to us. And so with the POCO F1, we put that same amazing 4,000 mAh battery that everybody loves. And this is a key product decision that we made early on. It seems like common sense, and almost everybody, whether it's enthusiasts or your mom or dad, everybody wants better battery life. And yet, in the race to outdo one another, flagship devices seem to have forgotten this. And this 4,000 mAh battery is 30% higher than other popular models, things like the S9, and this really makes a difference in practice. So let's take a look at some of the numbers here. You have 8 hours of gaming, 146 hours of music. I think that translates to around 6 days. But most importantly, it reduces anxiety. You don't need to constantly check your battery life. You don't need to worry about the next time you might be next to a power outlet. With the POCO F1, you get this great battery life, and finally, it's paired with a flagship SoC, the Snapdragon 845. And once you get used to phones with 4,000 mAh batteries, it's hard to change to anything else. And so I posted this just now on Twitter, but we met with a bunch of you guys I think in January, a couple months ago. And if you ask me, the most important thing is a 4,000 mAh battery. I actually don't think you need any sort of fast charging because it lasts the whole day. But we decided to include Quick Charge 3.0 because almost everybody across the board told us that you want both. And it doesn't just support it. We're including the 9-volt 2-amp charger in the box. Of course, we couldn't reveal all of this stuff when we were talking about it at the time, but we did listen to what you guys told us. And I think it pretty much speaks for itself. There's a couple of other things we can show you later. So again, this comes in the box, standard. All right, 4G Plus, and I think this is something that's pretty new. We worked really closely with Qualcomm on this to make the network performance fast. This is one of the first devices with 4G Plus here in India. So I can explain a little bit about it. Typically, your phone is connected to a single radio band. But with 4G Plus, it combines radio frequencies, different radio frequencies, to give you both faster network performance and better coverage. And it's important to note, one of the reasons why this is not very common here in India is the combinations that are required, the spectrum combinations that are required to support 4G Plus here are pretty unique. They're actually not really used anywhere else in the world.